We are here celebrating Carroll County History Week by talking with a variety of longtime residents of the area. Today we are chatting with Lula Morrow. Lula, can you give me an idea of where you were born and what it was like to grow up where you did?
I was born on a 165-acre farm in Baltimore County, about 4 miles from Carroll County, on the Mount Zion Road off of the Black Rock Road. And our town to go for shopping was Hampstead.
The big town of Hampstead.
To me, it was like a city.
What was your neighborhood like when you were growing up?
It was all rural farms. We had a church at the corner of Mount Zion Road, but other than that, and one little store that was in somebody's house, and they opened it. When you went to their door and knocked on the door, they would come out of the kitchen over to their store and open the door and let you in. So that was the only shopping in Mount Zion. So we had to come to Hampstead for bigger things.
What kind of things did you get at the little store in Mount Zion?
Well, things that my mother needed in the kitchen. Now, with that big farm, we raised just about everything that we ate. And so we didn't buy a lot. And I was born in 1927, which is sort of like the start of the Depression, and there was no money around. So you didn't buy a whole lot. But when she went to the store, she would get sugar, coffee, baking powder, yeast, and she baked all of her own bread. And my father smoked cigars, so she had to get him a couple of cigars. And just very, very few things like that she needed.
Could you describe kind of a typical day of what it was like when you were growing up?
Well, we all had jobs to do on the farm. There was a lot of work on the 165-acre farm, and my father grew corn, wheat, barley, oats. Those were the main crops at that time. There was no soybeans. And we had cows and horses. My father didn't have a tractor, so the horses pulled the plow, and so the wagons and whatever. And then and pigs, and we butchered every fall, and chickens, and my father had planted a big orchard, and we had all kind of fruit in there: apples, peaches, cherries, pears, and so we really had just about everything we needed there.
How many brothers or sisters did you have?
Well, I was from a big family, and there was 11 children, and I was the youngest. And my mother always said, "This is my baby," and I can remember her saying that.
What kinds of things growing up in the country, what kinds of things did you do for entertainment?
I know in the winter, when there were snows and blizzards and whatever, and we'd be snowed in for a while, that we played cards a lot. And my father would play cards with us, but we didn't play for money, but we didn't have any anyway. But he didn't believe in gambling, but we just played for fun. And some of the neighbors would come through the snow over to our house because they knew we would be playing cards. So that was in the winter. And we'd make homemade ice cream because there was, we had the old homemade freezer that you had to turn the crank, and we'd make that in the winter time. In the summer, we played. We were outside all the time. And I had older sisters. My oldest sister was 23 when I was born. The next oldest sister was 22. And I always said I had 3 mothers. So what one didn't think of, another one would. And my one sister was the cleaner of the house. And she wanted a clean house, which was almost impossible with 11 children, but she never gave up trying. And she would make the little ones, "Get out of here and go play outside," so we didn't dirty up the house. And we lived our house was right beside a wood, so we would go run over in the woods, and we had a lot of fun over there, climbing trees and making playhouses and things like that. So we stayed out. It was good. We loved, and her father always said we loved the woods so much because we had Indian blood in us, which was true back, a few generations back. There was one man had married an Indian. So he said that's why we like to be in the woods. And we'd pick berries and, do all those kind of things. But outside, wildflowers, and just have a good time. Look for four-leaf clovers and that kind of thing.
As you grew older, I can imagine you wanted different kind of entertainment. What did you do for entertainment as you got to be a teenager?
Well, when I became a teenager, and my older sisters and brothers, of course, had grown up and moved away from the farm and had all gone to Baltimore and had jobs and apartments and things like that. So I actually went down there and stayed with my sisters, and I got my first job when I was 15 in a Woolworths store. And then I was making money.
What did you do with your money?
Well, because we stayed with and I had a sister that was 2 years older than I was, and so she was kind of like my buddy. And then she was also had gone down there and had a job, and I think we had to pay give our other sisters like $5 a week because that was room and board, and for part of the food we had an apartment in my brother's house. And then of course I was buying clothes because I had never had many clothes on the farm, and buying clothes and going to the movies and that sort of thing.
Where did you go to school when you were growing up?
Well, when I was a child, there was a two-room schoolhouse at the corner of Black Rock Road and Mount Zion Road, and that's where my older sisters and brothers went. But 1 year before I was to start to school, then they consolidated the schools, and that was the end of that schoolhouse. And then we went on the school bus. But I got to go to that school one day because we always butchered in the fall, and I was very afraid of when I heard them shoot the pigs and they would squeal and holler, and I would get scared and I would run up and hide under the bed. And then I had these two older brothers, Jake and Warren, and one was 4 years older and one was 6 years older. And of course they teased me, made my life miserable. And they knew I was scared of the pigs, so they would go and cut out one of the eyeballs. And then they'd bring it up to the house and, run after me with this shiny old glossy pig's eyeball, and that scared me even more. So my mother sent me to school that day. My sister took me, and they took me in, and I sit beside my sister, and the teacher was Miss Huffman, and she let me, I think she gave me a paper or pencil or something, stayed there. I don't know if I stayed all day or just a half a day, and it was within walking distance of our house. But when I went to school in the first grade, she was my first grade teacher. She had left the one-room school and gone over to the big school. And I ran into her many years later. She lived to be an old lady, and I ran into her up here at St. John's Church at an affair. And I said to her, Miss Huffman, do you remember me? And she said, well, what's your name? And I said, well, Lula Hundredmark. She said, well, of course I remember you. And she said, I taught you how to spell your name. And in those days, or at least in their family, you didn't have preschool and kindergarten, and nobody was helping you with anything. And I didn't know how to spell my name, and with a big name like Hundredmark. And she said, I had you up at the blackboard and trying to teach you how to spell Hundredmark. And you was having trouble with it because it was so many letters. And she said, and I came up to the blackboard and put my arm around you, and she said, and I could just feel you trembling. And so I said, now you just go and sit down and we'll work on it some more tomorrow. So she said the next morning when I came to school, I said, Miss Huffman, I can spell my name now. And I had gone home and practiced all evening, so I got it right. But I'm just so amazed that she remembered that. She was, I guess, in her 90s.
Oh my.
She never married, and she was a wonderful school teacher.
Where did your mother shop for groceries other than going to your little neighborhood store?
Well, when we came up, when we would come to Hampstead, then she would go up there in the stores. And there was a store, it was Hyson's store, and then there was Lippy's, and I remember she would go in there. And she did a lot of her shopping through the Sears and the Ward's catalogs. And that's where we got our shoes when it was time to go to school, and we had to have new shoes for school. And she would put her foot on a piece of paper and draw an outline of her foot, and then you sent that in with your order. I want this shoe for this size, and that's how we were fitted. And I really, until I grew up, I don't remember ever going in a shoe store and getting a shoe until I got that job myself. But everything came from those catalogs, and it was a very inexpensive way to shop, and then it was a big selection. And we loved those catalogs, and in the winter, that's another thing we could do is look at the catalog and just, think, I wish I had this and I wish I had that. And then when the new catalog came, the old catalog, my mother would let us, my sister and I, we could have that. And we made paper dolls. And we would cut out a father and a mother and some children and girls and babies, and then you go through the catalog and cut out the clothes for the babies or the children and make little tabs to put on, would fold up over their shoulders, and we kept them in a cigar box, and we had a lot of fun with that. And we would get a piece of cardboard, and we made our own glue, flour and water, and then we would paste their people onto a piece of cardboard that we'd cut out and glue that together. And that was fun. And when we got tired of the clothes that they already had, we'd just get the catalog out and get them a whole new outfit. So that took care of us for a lot of times with her. And we'd cut out furniture, and we could make them a little house with furniture and all kinds of things.
Do you remember anything specific about the stores that your mom would go to, like Lippy's?
Well, I remember, no, I don't remember any of the people that worked there. I'm sure they knew them. But I know Heisen's had a lot of fresh produce, like coconuts. My mother always would get a fresh coconut at Christmas to make a coconut cake for Christmas, and things like celery and things like that we didn't, of course, raise on the farm. But or some fresh fish or something like that. And Lippy's, I know she would go in there to buy things, and I remember my sister saying she would go in and get dress material and then yard goods, and she would bring it home, and then they tell the girls they could make themselves new dresses. And she had a Singer sewing machine, the old foot pedal, and she could make anything, and we never had patterns because my mother would cut patterns out of newspaper. And she had like a sleeve pattern and a skirt, gourds for a skirt, or the yoke for the top and the front and the back of the blouse and interfacing. She had it all. And then, if you grew bigger and she needed bigger, she just cut some more. I suppose she learned that from her parents, her mother, I suppose, grandmother or whatever.
What was the downtown area like of Hampstead?
Well, I can remember Hampstead, and the first time I remember coming to Hampstead was when I was going to go to school, and my birthday was in July, and I was 6, and I hadn't had my vaccination yet. And my mother said, your daddy's going up to Hampstead with a load of corn to take it to the mill. And this was in a little wagon with a horse pulling it. And she said, we're going to go along, and we'll go up to Dr. Resch's office, and we'll get, and they called it a birdie. Now, why? But they said, you're going to get your birdie. And so, okay, we got on and this little wagon had a seat in the front. They called them, I think, a spring wagon. So we sat up there, all the way from there up to Hampstead on that little wagon of corn. And then when we got up there to Hampstead, my father went over to the mill, which is still where, the mill, which now is apartments and whatever. And then we walked down the street to Dr. Resch's office, and he was the last medical doctor of the Resch family. After that, they're all dentists, but it's the same family. But he was the medical doctor, and he lived across the street from where Resch's dental office is, and in a big house, and I'm sure he lived there, and he had the office in one room. So we walked up there, and my mother told him that I had to get my vaccination. And it hurt, and I can still remember that. And it wasn't just like one little stick, you know, stick, 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 stick. And I guess I was ready to cry. And anyway, that's what they called it. I'd gotten my birdie. And then when we got finished there, we went on back down to through Hampstead and back down to the mill. And I guess my father was done with his load of corn, and then we went home. But I can remember that Main Street, and the thing that we really loved about Hampstead was that carnival. And we got to go to that every summer. And I just thought we just thought that was the most magical place in the world. And my father was a musician, and he played, I guess, for 50 years in the bands of Carroll County, mostly the Elysia Band. And my brothers were also musicians, and at one time it was him and 3 brothers were all in the Elysia Band. And the carnival, I think it was Saturday, they always had a parade. And the Elysia Band would be in the parade, and all the fire engines and whatever would come down Main Street. And we would go for that. And I remember when the band was coming by, I would watch and look in there to see my father. And he played the big tuba. And I could, you know, I knew that because I saw that big horn around his neck and everything. And he was a very good musician. He could play any instrument at all, and he never had any lessons. And so it was all, but I remember when he would march by and we would look at him and he wouldn't look left or right. You know, it was all business. So, but that was exciting. And then we would go, when the parade was over, we would go over to the carnival ground. And that one street there was called, I think it was called Carnival Avenue. It's where the post office is now. And walking back there, I would be so excited, and I was a shy little country farm girl, and I guess that's the most people I ever saw was all those people that would be at the carnival. And we would walk back there to the carnival, and on one side of the road, there was a Ferris wheel, and there was the bandstand because the band would give a concert later in the day. And then on the other side of the road, there was the swings, we called them the swings, and then there was a merry-go-round. We called that the flying horses. And I remember the big booth there where they played bingo. And I guess I had never seen bingo before. And I remember how, to me, that was so exciting because the man would be up there calling out the numbers of the bingo. And then these big shelves were just full of all these prizes that you could win, and lamps and dishes and all that kind of stuff. And he would say, let's play bingo, the old corn game. And they had piles, they had shelled corn, the kernels of corn, they were dry, yellow, and they were piled beside each person who sit down with their card, and then they used those kernels of corn to mark the marker on the bingo. So that's why it was called the old corn game. But all that stuff just excited me, so I just was beside myself. And then later, and we didn't get much money to spend because there was no money, and I guess we might have got 15 cents a piece or something like that. But we would always be sure to get a box of Cracker Jacks, and because they always had a prize in there, and you just never knew what that was going to be. So we were always excited to get that box, and that was 5 cents, so that was one of our nickels was gone. And then we would get a box of, called them Kissies, it was like caramel twisted up in paper, and they always had a balloon in that bag, a box. It was a little box that had a balloon in, a free balloon. So we thought that was a good bargain. So with the Cracker Jacks, and we got the free prize, and the Kissies, and we got the free balloon there. So there was 2 of our nickels that was already gone. So I think I might have rode on the merry-go-round, but I don't remember riding on the Ferris wheel. That probably was more money. I don't know, but until I got older I did, but not when I was a little girl. And we usually would get an ice cream cone, so that was our money. But then when the band came down then and set up they had a stand there for the band, and then they had a concert. And then my father would always play a solo because he really was a good musician. And I remember my mother would get me, and she'd say, "Now, come on, we're going to go down to the bandstand because your father's going to play his solo." And then we would walk down there, and then we would listen. And when he would get up and play that solo, we were so proud. And my brothers would play solos too. One played the trumpet, one played the trombone, and one played the baritone. So.
When you were growing up in this area, what was your favorite place to go to? Was it the carnival?
I guess it was the carnival, and with him playing in the band, that was like where we would go. Where the band was going, we would go. If it was like at a church, they played at a lot of the churches for their church picnics, and then we would go around to those kind of things. So we sort of followed the band around, and that was kind of like the most fun, I guess, that we had in the summer.
Were you married in Carroll County?
No, I was married during the war, and or at the end of the war, 1946, and I met a boy from, he was born and raised in Connecticut, New Milford, Connecticut, and he was in the Navy stationed at Bainbridge, and I met him from there.
Where did you go to church when you were growing up?
Well, like I said, Mount Zion did have a church. It was right at the corner of Mount Zion and Black Rock Road. It's still there. It's it used to be a United Brethren Church, but they merged with the United Methodist Church, so that's what it is now. And of course it was within walking distance, so we walked up there for Sunday school and church, and that was a big part of their entertainment, or getting to know other people in the other people in the neighborhood. And they always had Children's Day, and I always had to sing a song. And one of my oldest sisters played the piano, and we had a piano, and we had every musical instrument just about that there was because of all the musicians. And we had a piano, and she had learned to play that, and she would teach me this song, and I always had to sing this solo until I got older, and then I began to get stage fright. And I didn't want to do it anymore. But when I was 3 years old, I think they said I was 3 the first time I sang, and I guess it was nothing to me, just get up there and sing the song. And then we always had a Christmas program too.
Now, I know you have lots of brothers and sisters. How did you keep in touch with all of your brothers and sisters?
Well, like I said, some of them were already grown when I was born, and some of them had left and gone to Baltimore and had jobs and so on. So we did not have a phone, and the whole time that we lived there on that farm at Mount Zion, we never had a phone, and we never had electric because at one time there was no electric came down Mount Zion Road. It was up on Black Rock Road, but it didn't come down Mount Zion Road for later years. So you had kerosene lamps, and we didn't have a telephone. My father did have a car now sometimes, and we would send letters and postcards, and this one postcard that I guess I kept it for this reason, because I don't know how many words are on there, but my oldest sister had married, and she lived about 5 miles from us, and she didn't have a phone either or a car, and so she would send us a postcard every week with everything that was going on with her, and we would send her a postcard every week with everything that was going on with us. And for 1 penny, you could get this postcard, and you put your 10 cents out in your mailbox and say, I want 10 postcards, and you get them, and then it was already posted, and then you just send that. You could fill it up with everything you had to say. Of course, they always said that the mailman could read it, but who cared? You didn't put anything that wasn't okay. And the mail, that was really important to us, was the mail. And we would run out to the mailbox and wait for the mailman to come, because we would get letters from, the others that had moved away and whatever. And maybe my mother had sent an order to Sears to get something, so we were always looking for something in the mail. And so that was really important. We'd run up there at the end of our lane and wait for the mailman to come. And I remember the mailman's name. It was Mr. Myers, and we called him Mailman Mars. So we had to run up there and see Mailman Mars and see if he had anything for us. So that was like a big thing when the mail came.
Carroll County has changed a lot over the years. What do you think has changed the most, and what have you missed the most about the way it used to be?
Well, everything has changed, and I think that I have really lived in an interesting time, because I do remember all these things, like when there wasn't even electric in the house, and no phones and things like that, and your communication was through the penny postcard and whatever. And it's just unbelievable the things that I have seen in my lifetime with email now and that sort of thing. They say, the post office is not doing well at all, and they might cut some deliveries. And and when I was a child, and we lived there on that farm, every day at about 4 o'clock, there used to be a plane and my father told us it was the mail plane. And he said it went from, I think he said, Philadelphia to Baltimore. And it came right over our house. And it was just a little small one-engine plane. And we would run out, and we called that a flying machine. And here comes the flying machine. And we would run out in the yard, and we would wave. And we could see his head up there. It was, so maybe he could see us, I don't know. But we'd always run out to wave to the man in the flying machine every day. It was about 4 o'clock. He had a schedule, so that's what my father called it, said that's the mail plane.
Well, it sounds like things are very different today, but we really do appreciate and thank you so much for sharing some of your memories of Carroll County. Thank you very much, Mrs. Morrow.
You're welcome. That was another thing that we looked for every week in the mail, was to get the Enterprise paper, because it had all the news of Hampstead and the big city, and what was going on in Hampstead, and and then they would have reporters from each little neighborhood that would send in their columns. And I think they had one from up around Grace Church, which wasn't too far from us, and so we knew a lot of people in Hampstead. My father had a sister that lived there, and in Hampstead, and a brother that lived in Greenmount, and we knew a lot of people up there. So when we get that little paper, boy, that we just scour that from page to page and read all those columns and see what all the news was from there. And I think today, I wonder if anybody still has any of those old copies, because I'd love to see one.
What's his name?
Bucky Harmon.
Yeah, I wonder if he does, because he had so much paper.
He might have.
He might have an Enterprise.
Yeah.
Too.
And you could send in things that you wanted them to print, like little news items. And I know during the war, when my brothers were in the service, my mother would send in a little item like, they're stationed here, and they're here and there and things like that. And I had one brother killed during the war, and then one brother was wounded, and then my one sister joined the Women's Army. So my mother had 3 children in the service at that time.
But she's a Gold Star mom.
Yeah. So, and I remember the little Enterprise with weddings, there was big descriptions about what the dresses were made out of and the style, and that they were decorated in this and that, and all the bridesmaids and what the color their dresses were, and then all that. It was in big detail, and the same way with funerals. And they would go in big details with who was the pallbearers and all that sort of thing. So that was big news. Weddings and funerals, and who officiated and all that.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
Yep. So that little paper we liked that.
Yeah. Sounds like it was quite a...
And that was printed here in Hampstead by Mr. Phillips, I think. He was the owner of the Enterprise. And there was one building in Hampstead that was his office, and then on the second floor, of that, that's where the Elysia Band practiced on, I think it was Saturday night.
Which building?
I don't think it's there anymore.
Oh.
It was just an old wooden building and kind of rickety, and I think I kind of think that it was kind of like over toward more on Shiloh, maybe down toward the railroad track there. I think that's where it was.
Yeah, there's just a parking lot up behind the bank and stuff. Well, this is fun.